Picture this. The year is 1717. The Caribbean is a boiling cauldron of rum, blood, and empire, where only the desperate or the damned dare raise the black flag. Yet into this savage world steps not a hardened sailor, nor a cutthroat rogue, but a wealthy, landowning gentleman from Barbados. His name was Stede Bonnet. He wore fine silks, spoke like a scholar, and had never commanded a ship in his life. And yet, one day, he abandoned his wife, his children, and his estate, and bought a warship with his own fortune, not earned by mutiny, not seized by violence, bought, like one buys a carriage or a horse. The pirates laughed at him, sneering that he was no more fit for the sea than a courtier for the gallows. But Stede Bonnet didn't laugh. He christened his ship the Revenge and sailed into history, determined to live the life of a pirate lord. What followed was a tale so unbelievable it has echoed for centuries. Bonnet, the so-called gentleman pirate, stumbled through raids with little knowledge of sailing, often relying on men who mocked him behind his back. He lost battles he should have won, made alliances that doomed him, and somehow, by luck, by boldness, by sheer absurdity, found himself sailing alongside Blackbeard himself. The world remembers him as the worst pirate, a man unfit for the life he chose. But buried in his story are darker truths, of a man suffocated by society, desperate for freedom, clawing at the sea for a name of his own. So, why did a wealthy gentleman turn his back on everything to embrace the skull and crossbones? And how did he, blundering and broken, end up feared by governors and hunted by the Royal Navy? It begins not with cannon fire, but with silence, the suffocating silence of a Barbados estate, where a restless man stared at the horizon and dreamed of the black flag. The estate on Barbados was quiet, but inside, Stede Bonnet's mind roared like a storm. He had wealth, land, and the respect of his peers, or so it seemed. Yet his marriage was loveless, his days monotonous, and the colonial gentry's rituals suffocated him. Each morning he walked the fields, overseeing sugarcane. Each night he dined in silence with a wife he barely spoke to. His neighbors admired his fortune, but whispered of his strangeness, his restless pacing, his eyes always turned toward the horizon. One evening, as the sea breeze drifted across his veranda, Bonnet made a decision that would defy reason. He would abandon it all, his estate, his wife, his children. He would build a new life, not as a planter, not as a gentleman, but as a pirate. Unlike the rogues who mutinied to seize their ships, Bonnet had the luxury of wealth. He purchased his own sloop, a fine vessel he christened the Revenge. She was swift, fitted with 10 cannon, her decks polished and new. The locals laughed what kind of pirate bought his ship, but Bonnet ignored them. He hired a crew of hardened men, offering wages instead of shares, an oddity that bred suspicion. Yet gold spends the same, and sailors desperate for coin took his offer when he stepped aboard the Revenge for the first time. Bonnet cut an awkward figure. He wore fine boots, a tailored coat, and a powdered wig ill-suited for salt spray. He had no sailor scars, no calloused hands. His voice was polite, his posture stiff. The crew smirked behind his back, whispering, "Gentleman pirate." Still, Bonnet gave the order to sail. The sails unfurled, the sloop caught the wind, and Barbados slipped into the distance. For the first time in his life, Bonnet was free, but freedom comes with a price at sea. Bonnet's inexperience showed quickly. He knew little of navigation, less of naval combat. His orders were clumsy, often contradicted by his own helmsman. He tried to command respect with polite words where other captains ruled with fear. His crew grew restless, mocking him openly. Their first raid nearly ended in disaster. Off the coast of Virginia, the Revenge chased a merchantman. Bonnet shouted for full sail, but misjudged the wind. His sloop stalled, giving the merchant time to arm her guns. Cannonballs screamed overhead, splintering the Revenge's mast. Panic rippled through the crew. Bonnet fumbled with his spyglass, shouting contradictory commands. Only by the grit of his seasoned gunners did they manage to board the merchantman. Swords flashing, pistols cracking, the loot was meager, but the taste of victory was intoxicating. Bonnet stood on the captured deck, blood spattered across his fine coat, and felt alive. For the first time, the suffocating silence of Barbados was gone. He heard only the roar of waves, the cries of battle, the laughter of men drunk on plunder. He had chosen the sea, and the sea had answered. Yet word spread quickly. A wealthy fool had taken to piracy. Governors mocked him, sailors sneered, and his own men doubted his worth. Still, Bonnet pressed on, raiding along the American coast. His crew grumbled, but the plunder kept them fed, and slowly they grew accustomed to their strange, gentlemanly captain. But Bonnet's fate would twist in ways none could predict. For on the horizon of his new life loomed a figure darker, more infamous than any pirate a livered would teach. The devil of the seas, the one they called Blackbeard. And soon, the gentleman, pirate, and the devil's son would meet. The Caribbean sun beat down like fire, its light gleaming off the turquoise waves. Stede Bonnet stood stiffly on the quarterdeck of the Revenge, wiping sweat from his brow with a lace handkerchief. His fine coat clung to him, damp with heat. Around him, his crew labored, bare-chested and tattooed, their hands blistered from ropes and guns, their laughter coarse. They eyed their captain with a mix of mockery and resentment. Weeks of raiding had brought plundered rum, cloth butt also strain. Bonnet's awkward commands, his polished manners, his habit of reading books aloud in the evenings while his men gambled, grated on hardened sailors. They followed him because of coin, not loyalty. And coin, they knew, would not protect them when the Royal Navy caught up. It was in this uneasy moment that fate brought another ship into view, black sails swelling, a monstrous figure looming at her prow, a ship bristling with cannon, her decks lined with bearded men bristling with pistols. A ship under the command of Edward Teach Blackbeard. The crew froze as the dark silhouette grew larger. Whispers rippled. It's him. The devil himself. Bonnet raised his spyglass. Through the glass, he saw the legend, tall, broad-shouldered, his black beard braided and tied with ribbons, slow match cords smouldering in it like serpents of fire, pistols strapped across his chest, cutlass at his hip. A man who ruled by fear, who inspired terror across oceans. Bonnet's heart pounded. He had heard the stories, as all men had. Blackbeard was not merely a pirate, he was a nightmare made flesh, a demon who walked the waves. The crew looked to their captain, waiting for an order. Run, fight, surrender. Bonnet swallowed hard. Stand your ground, he said, voice trembling. We shall parley. The men exchanged glances, half amused, half terrified. They reefed sails, slowing the Revenge. The black ship slid alongside, cannons ready. A booming voice carried across the water. Ahoy there! The gentleman pirate, is it? Laughter roared from Blackbeard's deck. Bonnet's face flushed crimson. He forced his voice steady. "This is Stede Bonnet, captain of the Revenge. State your purpose." Blackbeard himself stepped to the rail, smoke curling from his beard, eyes burning like coals. "My purpose? To see what full sails these seas in silk. I've heard of you, Bonnet. The planter who bought his own ship. The pirate who pays wages. A novelty, to be sure." His men laughed again. Bonnet clenched his fists. "I am as much a pirate as any man here. Is that so?" Blackbeard grinned, teeth flashing. "Then prove it. Sail with me." The offer shocked Bonnet and his crew alike. Blackbeard, master of the sea, offering alliance to a bungling amateur. But Blackbeard's cunning ran deeper than it seemed. He saw Bonnet's wealth, his fine ship, his gullible pride. Such a man was useful life only as a pawn. Bonnet, desperate for respect, seized the chance. "Very well," he said. "We sail together." And so the gentleman pirate fell into the devil's shadow. The weeks that followed were a blur of terror and awe. Blackbeard's ship, Queen Anne's Revenge, dwarfed Bonnet's sloop. Her decks crowded with over 300 men, her cannons bristling like a fortress. Where Bonnet hesitated, Blackbeard commanded with ruthless certainty. He seized ships with cunning, blockaded ports, and spread fear with every smouldering appearance. Bonnet watched, half admiring, half terrified. He saw how Blackbeard used fear as a weapon, firing cannons without aiming just to terrify crews, tying matches into his beard to glow like hellfire in battle. Where Bonnet's politeness bred mockery, Blackbeard's theatrics bred obedience. One evening, after a brutal raid on a French merchantman, Bonnet was summoned aboard Queen Anne's Revenge. He climbed the ladder nervously, the smell of powder and blood still clinging to the air. Blackbeard greeted him with a grin. "So, gentleman pirate, how does it feel to spill blood for more than coin?" Bonnet forced a smile. "Necessary." Blackbeard clapped him on the shoulder, nearly knocking him over. "You'll learn, Bonnet. Piracy isn't about coin. It's about fear. Men must tremble when they hear your name." "Do they tremble at Stede Bonnet?" The crew around them laughed. Bonnet's jaw tightened. "They will." Blackbeard studied him, eyes glinting. "Perhaps, if you survive." From then on, Bonnet became Blackbeard's companion, though never his equal. The crews mocked him, calling him Blackbeard's pet. Even his own men began to look to Blackbeard for leadership instead of him. Slowly, the gentleman pirate lost command of his own ship, but he did not abandon his dream. Deep inside, beneath the mockery, he still clung to the belief that he could be a true pirate, that he could carve his name into history. In the summer of 1718, Blackbeard made his boldest move yet, the blockade of Charleston, South Carolina. With Bonnet among his fleet, he trapped the city, seizing ships, plundering cargo, and holding hostages for ransom. The entire colony trembled, merchants begged, and Blackbeard revelled in his power. Bonnet, however, felt unease. He walked the deck of the Revenge, staring toward the city's harbour. "This will bring the full wrath of the crown," he muttered. His quartermaster, a scarred veteran named Clark, sneered. "And what then, Captain? You'll go back to Barbados and sip tea." The crew laughed. Bonnet turned away, shame burning. The blockade ended with ransom secured, but at a cost. Blackbeard, ever cunning, betrayed even his allies. He scuttled ships, abandoned men, and vanished with the best of the loot. Bonnet was left adrift, humiliated, His crew half-dashed deserted when he finally found Blackbeard again in North Carolina. The betrayal cut deep. Bonnet stormed aboard Queen Anne's Revenge, demanding answers. "You left us to rot," Bonnet shouted. Blackbeard's grin was cold. "I left you alive. Be grateful. You stole what was mine." Blackbeard leaned close, smoke curling from his beard. "Yours? Nothing is yours, Bonnet. Not the sea, not the loot, not even your men. They follow strength, not silk. Remember that." Bonnet staggered back, fury boiling. But there was no denying the truth. His crew no longer respected him. His reputation was in tatters. The gentleman pirate was a laughingstock. Yet something shifted that day. Humiliation hardened into resolve. Bonnet would no longer cling to Blackbeard's shadow. He would strike out alone, reclaim his ship, his name, his destiny. He returned to the Revenge, gathered what men remained, and sailed south. He would raid again, not for coin, but for pride. He would prove, once and for all, that Stede Bonnet was no fool, that the gentleman pirate could command fear as well as any devil. But pride is a dangerous compass. It points not to safety, but to ruin. And Stede Bonnet's course was already set, toward disaster. The betrayal at Charleston festered like a wound. Blackbeard had vanished with the best of the plunder, leaving Stede Bonnet humiliated before his crew and mocked by every pirate along the Carolina coast. The gentleman pirate, they said, was nothing more than the devil's puppeteer silk-wrapped fool who had been used and cast aside. Bonnet seethed. For months he had swallowed mockery, endured sneers, and even tolerated Blackbeard's scorn. But no longer. Pride, wounded, desperate, reckless drove him now. He would not return to Barbados in shame. He would not fade into a footnote of another man's legend. He would raise the black flag on his own terms, and he would prove to the world that Stede Bonnet was no one's puppet. Back aboard the Revenge, the atmosphere was tense. The crew, whittled down by betrayal and desertion, muttered in corners. Some wanted to leave, to join stronger captains. Others remained only because Bonnet still paid wages instead of shares. But Bonnet gathered them on deck, his powdered wig gone, his coat stripped of finery. "Men," he said, his voice carrying across the waves, "you call me the gentleman pirate. You mock me for silks and manners. But hear me now. I am your captain. I will lead you not as Blackbeard's lackey, but as master of our fate. Together we will strike fear into every merchant from Virginia to the Bahamas. Together we will take what we are owed." The men murmured uncertainly. Some sneered, but others, hardened by hunger and desperation, nodded. They needed a leader, even a flawed one, and so Bonnet, with fury in his chest, set sail southward. His first act of defiance was bold, reckless, and strangely effective. Off the coast of Virginia, he seized 2 sloops, their holds packed with provisions. The raids were sloppy. Bonnet's commands clashed with his officers. Cannon fire splintered his own rigging, but fortune favored him. The sloops surrendered quickly, and for the first time, Bonnet stood victorious without Blackbeard looming above. On deck, he watched his men drag barrels of food and casks of rum across the planks. His chest swelled. "Do you see?" he shouted. "The sea bends to us, not to teach, not to kings." The crew roared with approval, rum already spilling into mugs. For a fleeting moment, Bonnet felt like a true captain. But piracy is not a game of chance, it is a war of wolves. Word of Bonnet's raids spread fast. Merchants cursed his name, governors vowed vengeance, and other pirates laughed at his fumbling victories. Yet the gentleman pirate's flag was no longer a joke. He was a nuisance, a thorn, a problem to be solved. And in the Caribbean, problems were dealt with swiftly. Still, Bonnet pressed on. His fleet, now bolstered by captured sloops, prowled the Carolinas. He struck at night, fumbling through orders, but buoyed by the sheer desperation of his men. Each victory added to his pride, but each also tightened the noose of the Royal Navy. Then came the turning point, the renaming of his ship. At anchor one sweltering afternoon, Bonnet gathered his crew. The Revenge, once his proud purchase, now carried the stink of Blackbeard's betrayal. Its very name mocked him. "No longer shall we sail under a name chosen in haste," Bonnet declared. "This ship is reborn. From this day forth, she is Royal James." The men cheered weakly, more for the promise of rum than the ceremony. But for Bonnet, the moment was profound. The gentleman pirate was gone. He was Captain Bonnet of the Royal James, ruler of his own fate. Yet fate had other plans. By late summer of 1718, Bonnet anchored in the Cape Fear River to refit Royal James. His ships were battered, his crew worn, but the river provided shelter. There, amidst the humid swamps and buzzing insects, Bonnet repaired his rigging and patched his hull. He believed himself safe. He was wrong. Governor Robert Johnson of South Carolina had grown weary of pirates strangling his colony's trade. He dispatched Colonel William Rhett with 2 well-armed sloops and orders to hunt down Bonnet. Rhett was no pirate, but he was relentless. His men rowed and sailed up the Cape Fear, searching for the gentleman pirate. On the morning of September 27th, 1718, Bonnet's lookout spotted sails. 2 sloops, flying no flags, sliding upriver with menace in their lines. Panic rippled through Bonnet's camp. Royal Navy? A sailor gasped. Bonnet's face hardened. "No, South Carolina militia. But they come for us all the same." The men scrambled aboard Royal James, cut anchors, and readied cannon. Bonnet stood at the quarterdeck, cutlass at his side, heart hammering. For all his blunders, for all his mockery, this was the moment that would define him. The sloops drew closer. Rhett's men raised muskets, their drums beating. Bonnet shouted to his gunners, "Fire!" The river exploded with smoke and thunder. Cannonballs ripped through the humid air, splintering masts and spraying water. Muskets cracked, screams rang out. The Royal James returned fire, her broadside roaring, but fortune betrayed Bonnet at last. In the shallow river, both his ship and Rhett's ran aground, trapped in mud and sand. For hours, the 2 sides pounded each other, unable to move, locked in a brutal slugging match. Smoke choked the river, men fell bleeding on the decks, and the water ran crimson with blood. Bonnet strode the deck like a man possessed, barking orders, reloading pistols, dragging wounded men to safety. The gentleman pirate was gone. Here stood a captain fighting for his life, his ship, his name. But the tide rose slowly, and fate sided with Rhett. His sloops lifted free first, guns swinging to rake Bonnet's stranded vessel. Shot tore through sails and men alike. The crew screamed for surrender. Bonnet's face twisted with fury. "We fight to the last," he roared. But his men, broken and bleeding, ignored him. A white flag was raised. The battle was over. The gentleman pirate was a prisoner. They dragged Bonnet in chains to Charleston. Crowds gathered to jeer, to mock, to spit. Newspapers called him the laughingstock of piracy, the worst pirate who ever sailed. Governors sneered, merchants celebrated. Yet behind the mockery was fear, for Bonnet, fool though he was, had still brought fire to their waters. In his cell, Bonnet sat with head bowed. He thought of Barbados, of the estate he had abandoned, of the children he had left behind. He thought of Blackbeard, still free, his legend growing while Bonnet rotted. And he thought of the gallows, looming closer with each passing day. But was it truly the end? Pirates were cunning, slippery as eels, and Stede Bonnet, for all his failures, was not yet ready to bow to fate. The jail in Charleston reeked of sweat, rot, and despair. Rats scurried across damp straw, chains clinked with every restless shift of bodies. Stede Bonnet sat slumped against the cold wall, iron biting his wrists, his once-proud coat tattered and stained. Outside his barred window, he could hear the city, the laughter of taverns, the clatter of hooves on cobblestone, the murmured prayers of colonists who now felt safe from his flag. But inside the cell, the gentleman pirate was undone, his men those who had followed him into fire and smoke, even as they mocked him, were locked in neighboring cells. Some cursed him openly, calling him a fool who had led them to ruin. Others sat silent, hollow-eyed, awaiting the inevitable. Trials had begun already, swift and merciless. Charleston wanted blood. Bonnet replayed the battle at Cape Fear in his mind over and over. The thunder of cannon, the choking smoke, the moment when his ship groaned under the tide and refused to rise. He remembered shouting for his men to fight, his voice cracking with rage, and then the white flag rising, not by his hand but theirs. Betrayal, or was it mercy? Even now, he wasn't sure. The days bled together. Guards mocked him, calling him Captain Silk. Visitors came only to gape at the infamous gentleman pirate. Newspapers painted him as a fool, a curiosity, an embarrassment to piracy itself. They said he was weak, indecisive, a parody of a captain. And yet, beneath the jeers, a strange fascination grew. Here was a man who had everything, wealth, land, respect, and had thrown it all away for the black flag. Madness, yes, but also defiance. One night, as rain lashed the windows and thunder growled above, a whisper spread among the prisoners. Escape. Bonnet's heart leaped. The plan was desperate. Friends from Charleston's underbelly sympathizers, drawn by pirate gold or by hatred of the English crown, would smuggle tools into the jail. At night, the prisoners would saw through bars, bribe a guard, and flee into the swamp. From there, they could reach the coast, steal a sloop, and vanish into the Caribbean. Bonnet clung to the hope like a drowning man to driftwood. Each night, he whispered with his men, making promises of freedom, of loot, of a new start. "We will rise again," he told them. "We will show them the gentleman pirate cannot be chained." The night came. The rain masked their movements. The storm covered their whispers. Bonnet's hands, blistered and bleeding, worked feverishly at the bars with a smuggled file. Sparks flew. The iron gave way with a shriek muffled by thunder. They slipped into the night, shadows against the storm. Through alleys, over fences, into the marsh they ran. Bonnet's heart pounded, his breath ragged. Mud sucked at his boots, reeds whipped his face. Behind them, shouts rose. Guards had noticed. Muskets cracked in the dark. But for a moment, freedom seemed within reach. The swamp spread wide, the river beyond promising escape. Bonnet could almost see the sails, smell the salt, hear the creak of rigging dot, Then came the dogs, their barks cut through the storm like knives. Torches flared behind, shadows racing closer. Bonnet stumbled, fell into the muck, scrambled up again. His lungs burned, his legs screamed. Around him, men were dragged down, clubs cracking, chains snapping shut once more. He ran until he could run no more. Then hands seized him, rough and merciless, dragging him back through the swamp, mud streaking his silk. The gentleman pirate's escape had failed. The trial that followed was swift, brutal, and inevitable. The court in Charleston wanted a spectacle, a warning to all who dreamed of piracy. Bonnet was charged with multiple counts of piracy. His crimes listed in painstaking detailed raids, thefts, murders. All the chaos of his short career, he stood in the dock, pale and trembling, his wig gone, his fine manners stripped. Witnesses came forth, merchants and sailors who had faced him. Some described him as a bumbling amateur, others as a dangerous rogue. All condemned him. Bonnet tried to defend himself. He spoke of desperation, of being misled, of his association with Blackbeard. He begged for mercy, claiming he had been drawn into piracy by others stronger than himself. The judges sneered. The jury did not deliberate long. The verdict was death. Bonnet's legs buckled. He gripped the railing, his face ashen. Death had always haunted piracy, but now it was no longer an abstract threat. It was real. The gallows loomed back in his cell. Despair consumed him. He wept openly, the walls echoing with his sobs. He wrote letters pleas to the governor, desperate apologies to his children, confessions laced with regret. He prayed, he cursed, he paced endlessly. The gentleman pirate, who had once strutted in silks and dreamed of glory, was now just a broken man waiting for the rope. But fate was crueler. Still, news came that his execution was delayed and cancelled, but delayed so that more pirates could be hanged with him, a grand spectacle to satisfy the colony. Bonnet would not die quickly. He would wait, stewing in fear, as days stretched into weeks. Each morning he woke wondering if it was his last. Each night he lay shivering, hearing the gallows creak in his dreams. His men died first. One by one they were marched to the square, ropes placed around their necks. Bonnet heard their final curses, their prayers, their screams cut short by the drop. He pressed his hands to his ears, but still he heard them, echoing through stone and iron. Alone, surrounded by silence, Bonnet's mind unravelled. He spoke to himself, argued with shadows, begged unseen judges for mercy. At times, he swore he heard Blackbeard's laughter drifting through the walls, mocking him still. Yet in rare moments of clarity, he remembered why he had left Barbados. The suffocating silence, the empty holes, the hollow life. Better to die a pirate, he thought, than to live forever in chains of wealth and duty. Better to die as Stede Bonnet, the gentleman pirate. Charleston, late 1718. The air was heavy with tension, the city alive with whispers of the coming spectacle. Pirates were no longer shadows on the horizon. They were prisoners in chains, their fate sealed by the gallows. Among them, one name stirred particular fascination: Stede Bonnet. The gentleman pirate, he had been a curiosity since his capture. His trial a public drama that filled taverns with gossip and sermons with fire. The newspapers painted him as both villain and fool, a man who had abandoned wealth and privilege for the madness of the sea. For the citizens of Charleston, his hanging would not merely be justice, it would be entertainment. A carnival of retribution. In his cell, Bonnet sat, the weeks of waiting gnawing at him more than any battle ever had. He had once dreamed of glory, of being remembered alongside Blackbeard and Bartholomew Roberts. Now he was remembered in whispers of pity and ridicule. He had written letters in a fever of desperation, one to Governor Johnson, pleading for clemency, others to his children, apologizing for the disgrace he had brought their name. I was foolish, one read, and I chose poorly. But know that I loved you, even as I fled from the world that bound me. The governor did not reply. The children never came. The day of execution drew near. Bonnet was to hang with 30 of his men amassed, display meant to terrify others from piracy. The gallows were built near White Point, where the Ashley and Cooper rivers met the sea. Crowds gathered days in advance, merchants, planters, slaves, and children, all pressing to witness the downfall of men who had once ruled the waves. Bonnet's men went first. He listened as they were marched from their cells, shackled and silent, their boots echoing on stone. Some sang bawdy songs to hide their fear. Others cursed the crown until their last breath. He heard the crowd roar, the trapdoor creak, the thud of bodies swinging. The sound haunted him, a drumbeat in his skull that would not stop. His turn came days later. On the morning of December 10th, 1718, guards entered his cell. Time, one muttered. Bonnet rose slowly, legs trembling, the iron at his wrists cold against his skin. He had dressed as best he could, insisting on dignity even in death. A clean white shirt, a plain coat, no silks, no wig. He wished to be remembered not as a caricature, but as a man. A condemned man, yes, but still a man. They led him through the streets. Crowds surged, shouting, jeering, laughing. Some hurled rotten fruit. Others simply stared, curious to see the pirate lord who had once bought his ship like a toy and tried to play at being captain. Bonnet kept his eyes forward, lips moving silently in prayer. At White Point, the gallows loomed. Tall wooden frames, ropes swaying in the wind. The river shimmered beyond, as if mocking him with the sight of the sea he would never sail again. The minister stepped forward, offering comfort, urging him to repent. Bonnet nodded faintly, though his thoughts were elsewhere. He thought of Barbados, the veranda where he had first dreamed of escape, the cane fields stretching under the sun. He thought of the Revenge, her sails catching the wind, the thrill of his first raid, the fleeting taste of freedom. He thought of Blackbeard, who even now was dead, his head on a pike in Virginia, and wondered if their souls would meet again in hell. The noose was placed around his neck. The crowd fell silent. Bonnet lifted his eyes to the horizon. He spoke, his voice trembling but clear enough for those nearest to hear. I was not born for the sea, yet the sea called me all the same. If I am a fool, then I am a fool who lived free, if only for a moment. Pray for my soul, for I go now to meet my Maker. The executioner adjusted the knot. The minister murmured a final blessing. The crowd leaned forward as one, breath held. The trapdoor fell. The gentleman pirate swung. For a moment, silence hung over Charleston. Then the crowd erupted cheers, jeers, shouts. Some laughed at his jerking body, others crossed themselves solemnly. Children clung to their mothers' skirts, wide-eyed. The colony had been cleansed, they thought. The sea was safer. The age of pirates ending. But legends are not buried so easily. Sailors in taverns whispered of Bonnet's final words, some claiming he had cursed the crown with his last breath, others that he had smiled, defiant to the end. Rumors spread that he had not truly died, that bribes had bought him a body double, that he had slipped away into exile, that he still sailed in secret seas under another name. The truth was simpler. Stede Bonnet's body was cut down, buried in an unmarked grave near the water. His men swung beside him, their bones left as warnings to all who passed. The gentleman pirate was gone, and yet his story endured. For years afterward, sailors mocked his memory, calling him the worst pirate who ever lived. Ballads made him a punchline, plays caricatured him as a bumbling fool in silks. His name became shorthand for arrogance, for failure, but beneath the ridicule something lingered. His choice had been mad, yes, but it had also been bold. He had walked away from wealth, from safety, from comfort, and reached for freedom, even if he did not know how to hold it. He had lived, however briefly, by his own rules. In that, he was not so different from the fiercest pirates of his age. Stede Bonnet's body may have swung on the gallows at White Point in December of 1718. But death did not end his story, for legends do not need flesh to walk the earth, and the gentleman pirate became larger in memory than he ever was in life. In the years that followed, sailors mocked his name as the most foolish of captains. The man who bought his own ship and dared to play at piracy without knowing a mast from a mizzen. Yet beneath their laughter, unease simmered, because there was something deeply unsettling about a wealthy planter who had abandoned his family, his fortune, and his home to chase the black flag when he had no need. No hunger, no desperation driving him, only a restless fire in his chest that no estate in Barbados could quench. And so the mocking turned to whispers, whispers to tavern tales, and tavern tales to legends that slipped across oceans, mutating in the mouths of sailors until they no longer spoke of Stede Bonnet the fool, but of Stede Bonnet the ghost, condemned to sail forever as punishment for betraying both the land that bore him and the sea that scorned him. His phantom galley, the Revenge, said to rise in mists off the Carolinas, her sails ragged and pale as bone, her captain at the rail with a noose still around his neck, face pale as moonlight, wig drifting like seaweed, calling to lost sailors with promises of gold if they dared follow him into waters where no chart could save them. Some swore they saw him during hurricanes, his spectral ship gliding effortlessly through waves that smashed real vessels to splinters. Others said his voice carried on the wind, reading poetry as he once had to his crew, words twisting into curses that lured men to watery graves, and in Charleston itself, long after the crowds had forgotten the spectacle of his hanging. Locals claimed they saw him wandering the marshes at night, mud-caked to his boots, chains rattling faintly as though the swamp itself still remembered the night he tried to escape through its shadows. Dogs barking in the distance, though no dogs were near. Even scholars centuries later puzzled over him, for while Blackbeard was a monster of fear and Roberts a tactician of greed, Bonnet seemed to embody something more haunting, the madness of choice. The question of why a man with everything would throw it all away for chaos. And in that question lay the seed of his myth. For people feared that perhaps in every one of them lingered the same hunger, the same suffocating boredom, the same whisper that life, even a good life, might be a prison. And so Bonnet, who was mocked in life, became, in death, a mirror, reflecting the darkest secret of the human heart, that freedom is worth ruin, that madness is worth memory, that even foolish dreams burn brighter than hollow comfort. Thus, when storms lashed the Carolina coast and the waters churned black with fury, fishermen still swear that a lone sloop cuts across the horizon, lanterns glowing pale, a captain standing stiff and awkward at the quarterdeck, staring not at the sea but at the land he abandoned, as if searching for the home he forsook. And they whisper that if you listen closely, you can hear him speaking in a trembling voice, half apology, half defiance. I was not made for the gallows. I was made for the sea before his ship fades into fog, leaving only silence, only dread, and the knowledge that the gentleman pirate never truly found his rest. Because legends, like ghosts, do not die, they wait. They wander, they whisper, and perhaps they warn. And so the final twist of Stede Bonnet's tale is this: though history branded him the worst pirate, eternity may have granted him what he always sought to be remembered, feared and never forgotten, a phantom upon the waves who proves that even failure, when defiant, can outlast kings, empires, and time itself. History calls Stede Bonnet the worst pirate, a fool who stumbled into battles he barely understood, a gentleman who traded silks for shackles. But here's the twist: his story has outlived nearly every other pirate of his age. Blackbeard died in fire and fury. Roberts died in a storm of cannon shot, yet their names became fearsome legends. Bonnet, mocked, ridiculed, forgotten by his own family, became something stranger, an immortal ghost of failure. In being the worst, he became unforgettable. And perhaps that's the secret. Legends aren't born only of victory, they're born of defiance, even when doomed. Stede Bonnet's gallows creaked for only a few moments, but his story still creaks in our imaginations 3 centuries later. So next time you hear the wind over the Carolina marshes, or glimpse a pale sail on a moonlit horizon, ask yourself, is it just the sea? Or is it the gentleman pirate still chasing a freedom that death itself could not chain? If you thought this tale was wild, wait until you hear the next untold pirate story, one darker, stranger, and closer to truth than you dare imagine. Subscribe and join me on the next voyage into the shadows of history.